If you've had any cryptid encounters that you'd like me to share on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. My house has always been creepy. Growing up, I've had unexplained experiences starting from the time I was 4 and never stopping. I live in rural Kentucky, one of those towns that solely rely on coal and is 5 years behind the rest of the world. In general, the whole town is still covered in thick woods that appear to have not been tampered with in hundreds of years. My house is placed right in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by an extreme amount of woods and even a couple ponds. That gives you the setting for my home. This is where the real story begins. Growing up, I was never allowed to watch shows such as Ghost Hunters or even movies such as The Exorcist in my house because of the weird activity which goes on here. I'd experienced it from an extremely young age, and my mom, who had lived in this house her whole life, had also. However, one night my family made an exception and we all watched a documentary about Waverly Hills together. At that age, I still slept in the room with my mom due to me being afraid of sleeping in the house. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the feeling of something watching me. I felt extremely uneasy. I rolled over to look around the room, and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall, but looked as if it had a broken back and couldn't stand up completely. It was slouched over and had extremely pale skin and bones sticking out under the skin everywhere due to how skinny it was. It had long claws hanging from both hands. Its face was sunken in, and eyes were completely black holes. A few greasy hairs were visible on its head. It had clothing, but no genitals or nipples. I was horrified. I rolled over and covered myself up head to toe with the cover. I refused to move or look out for the rest of the night, even though I was fully awake. Finally, my mom woke up that morning. She immediately started complaining of her side hurting. She raised her shirt to look and found huge claw marks down her side. It was 3 deep wounds which were extremely inflamed and still bleeding. I felt horrible knowing that thing did that to her while I lay beside her hidden. A couple months later, I saw the creature again, although not as horrible as the first experience. I was woken up to the creature slouched on the floor on the side of my bed. It was watching me sleep. I covered myself again immediately, but this time I got the courage to peek out and found it still looking at me. I'm not sure when it went away because I didn't dare look again. The feeling that the room containing the creature gave me was horrifying. I got chills and my hair stood on end before even seeing it for the first time. It had the feeling of complete evil to it. I'm 18 now and obviously sleep in my own room. However, I still live in the same house. My mom still sleeps in the room where I witnessed this creature. Almost nightly, she has nightmares about something watching her in her room. She has nightmares about something hiding in the paintings on her walls or something coming from the ceiling in her room while she sleeps. There's one specific corner of the room where almost every dream seems to originate in. Our cats refuse to stay in that room if the door is shut. If anyone has any information about any folklore that could relate, please tell me. I'm desperate for any information about what I've saw. I've had countless other experiences in this house, but those are the major ones. Also, I'd like to make it clear I wasn't aware of the creepypasta of the rake until 2016. This event took place many years before that. I've only referred to the creature as rake-like because of the similarities in what I saw, and I didn't really have anything better to compare it to. Story 2. Is Bigfoot in Louisiana? You're darn right it is. Years ago, I was a long-haul truck driver. For the most part, it was a good job. The pay was good, and, with a few books on tape, a long trip would seem pretty quick. To be sure, there were some weird folks who drive, and I'm sure there were more than a few folks I met who would score high on the FBI's serial killer profile, which is antisocial borderline personality test. I learned that I can make more money hauling hazardous waste from the Northeast down to an incinerator in Louisiana. I needed DOT certifications, but multi-choice exams were never a problem for me. I aced the test and then took the one-day safety course. The instructor, Earl, was a no-nonsense guy. I liked him immediately. Towards the end of the class, he called me aside. Let me guess. You think you're hot stuff because you're going to make more money with the quick shot down 95? That's true. Why spend 20 hours making 65% less money? I responded. Earl told me, well, I've done it, and I've seen some stuff. You need to watch yourself around folks down there who don't want any Yankee dropping New York hazardous waste into their swamps. And that's what passes for human. Now, they ain't all bad, but the bad ones are terrible. Plus, there's all kinds of voodoo and legends down there. You got a piece? I didn't know what he meant, and he must have seen the puzzled look on my face. A gun. Do you have a gun? No, I said. Earl passed me a phone number on a slip of paper. You call Rich. He'll set you up right and give you training at his range. But don't disrespect the man. Tell him I sent you, bring cash, and don't ask any silly questions. Rich hooked me up with a .357 Magnum, and I'm glad he did. The first few trips were okay. Didn't help that the truck said hazardous waste on the placard, and that I had New York license plates. Most folks were friendly, but a couple of folks blamed me for every social injustice the South experienced in the last 100+ years. One night, I was on a narrow 2-lane country road. I'd made the trip a dozen times before. It was after midnight, and I would get to the incinerator plant in a few hours and sleep until they opened. I had coffee with my late dinner, so I was awake and alert. As I came across a narrow bend, up ahead I saw what I thought was a group of swamp men, maybe 5 of them, standing around what I thought was a roadblock. I assumed they wanted to rob me. They could take the truck. That was the only thing of value. I slowed down and put the .357 on my lap. My go bag was on the seat next to me. I couldn't turn around or back up. Forward was the only option. As I got closer, I could make out what was actually going on in my headlights. In the middle of the road, there was a giant boar. Had to be 800 pounds or more. The mountain men were too big to be human. They were ripping this boar apart and eating it. They looked at me and kept eating. I couldn't believe it at first. This had to be a joke, but they were eating the boar's raw flesh. Eventually, they turned towards me and let out this blood-curdling growl. Then they ran into the woods. What did I see? Story 3. For some background, this happened in December of 2015. In this story, I'm 19 years old, a college student native to California. I have spent a lot of years in the wilderness, as I was an adventure scout, and am well versed in self-defense, and am altogether a pretty experienced hiker. This happened when visiting family in Bluff, Washington, specifically in an area near Coal Creek. I go on walks a lot, as it helps clear my mind, and every day of this trip, I would go on a morning and an evening hike at around 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. respectively, just because the lighting situations in the Pacific Northwest can get dicey pretty fast. I was a college student in my sophomore year of university, and I would specifically go on these walks to talk to my secret boyfriend, as I was in a conservative family who didn't want me to date until later on. While on the phone with my then boyfriend, I went down some old-looking stairs in a vast clearing. I got weird vibes from it, but it was oddly tranquil, with a creek bubbling through the area. It was like a miniature valley, like a small divot or bowl in the land. I was in a relatively suburban area near a busy street, but I couldn't even hear any of the regular traffic noises you would come to anticipate from somewhere roughly suburban like that. Everything was silent for the most part, which usually would have tipped me off, but in my 19-year-old mind, it was an awesome environment for speaking to my secret boyfriend. So I take a seat on the riverbed on a large rock. The trees were like a curtain, and it felt so private, which I kept feeling was very odd. I continued to stay on the rock, chatting and catching up with my boyfriend, but then I hear a large crack, as if someone had snapped something in half. I was weirded out by it, but continued to justify it by remembering that there was construction going on nearby anyway. My phone line started to get a little funky as well, as my XBF goes from clear to warbly. While waiting for the phone to connect, I remember impatiently making a few splashes with my boots in the creek. In the reflection of the creek, under the tree cover, I can see what I would only describe as a stag, standing on its hind legs, but completely upright with the hands of a human. This thing was big. I would imagine like 7 feet tall and thin, and was about 30 yards from me. I freak out, yelling my boyfriend's name in vain on the phone, sprinting up the stairs and running back to my family's house. I see my mom and shake her down and tell her about it. She first insists I didn't see anything, I'm probably overreacting, but since I'm convinced, she lets up and lets me explain. She tells me to take a shower and take a nap, but I didn't want to do that at all. I did shower and realized how much dirt there was on me. That night, after making sure that my family was asleep, I called my boyfriend and asked him if he had heard anything happened. He claimed that he only heard my voice, warbling wildly, and then he cut the line. I get frustrated because I might have been in danger, but he complains that there's no way for him to know something like that. For the rest of my trip up there, I go on walks but avoid Coal Creek, and instead walk to Lake Washington in the mornings and evenings instead. However, since I am able to pass the stairs to the clearing, I had to resist the urge to look every time I went on another walk. Now every single time I think about it, or tell someone else, I get a massive headache from it. I'm wondering if it's a mild form of PTSD, but I have had a lot of dreams about the thing. Not doing much, but just staring at me. And whenever I do dream about it, I dream about the thing in my environment, which would be wherever it is that I fall asleep, which is extra unnerving. If anyone else has had similar experiences in the area, I'd love to hear about it. I still don't know what I've seen, and I'm not sure if I would want to make myself more of a spiritual target for it than I already seem to have.